Father, one of us must die.
Hello and welcome. I'm your host, Will. We got a good one for you, true believers. If you're a fan of the lethal protector, Venom, then you must know his story. But do you know how it ends? In this video, we're gonna go over the one-shot comic that explains it in detail. Let's get to it.
This is what I have learned from my years of reading comic books, especially in the superhero genre. The superheroes are famous for outliving the readers. They might fall in battle every now and then, but there's always a resurrection or a reboot, or even a multiverse variant waiting in the wings. Well, such is how the industry functions because the story must go on. And I have often wondered how things would be like if there wasn't going to be a next issue and a hero or an anti-hero actually reached the end of the line. Marvel asked this question in the early 2000s, and they launched a bold new series of one-shots that were titled The End. The concept was born during a massive creative renaissance at Marvel, which was spearheaded by the then editor-in-chief Joe Quesada and President Bill Jemas. These were some tough times for Marvel because of the comic crash during the 1990s and a devastating bankruptcy, and it was time to shake off the continuity baggage and inject some fresh energy. We have all wondered how a character's saga finally closes, and these stories were placed outside the continuity timelines, where writers and artists had the ultimate creative freedom to do whatever they wanted to do with the characters. The primary idea was to show us the end, where the character would be killed without upending the main universe. Some of my favorite Marvel storylines come from here, such as the time when an isolated Bruce Banner can be seen wandering a post-apocalyptic wasteland, or Frank Castle punishes the last remnants of humanity. Back then, the concept was a massive hit, and Marvel brought back the End storylines in 2020 as well, alongside other characters that were explored here like Captain America, Deadpool, and Miles Morales. Venom's story really strikes a chord with me, and in this video, I'll dive into the end of Venom that pushes the boundaries of space, time, and biology. This is a story where the last surviving organic entity in the universe is a hungry and heartbroken alien symbiote that tries to protect the genetic memory of every living thing from a universe-consuming swarm of super AI. And I promise you that this is easily one of the best Venom stories ever created. This one-issue comic book account of Venom has an unnamed narrator who tells us the story of the Venom symbiote and its grand sacrifice to save all forms of biological life. However, before proceeding to Venom's final battle against the godmind, the narrator describes its last stand as something that was doomed to fail from the start. Going back through time, and I mean a hell lot of time spanning hundreds and thousands of years, the narrator talks about the Venom symbiote as a member of a species of eldritch parasites that function as living extra-dimensional tesseracts. These required living hosts to anchor them to the fabric of space and time, and this brings the narrator to the topic of the Venom symbiote's love for Eddie Brock. Even the narrator is slightly amused at how much the connection with Eddie Brock worked for the symbiote, and he notes that Venom's first run through the golden age of humanoid superheroism was almost monogamous. It recorded the genetic material of all its hosts in a genetic codex, and the narrator talks about the inclusive taste of Venom in hosts as its codex database included not only humans, but Kree, which were a variety of mutants, and many other species. One thing that really appeals to me about this particular comic issue is how futuristic it looks, which is perfectly in line with the narrative. The colors are vibrant, and even the storytelling feels like the narrator is some kind of supremely advanced AI, which is not a really absurd guess, as you will later find out in this video. Coming back to the narrative, it's revealed that even though the Venom symbiote was immortal and could prolong the life of its hosts, it couldn't really do so indefinitely. This was proven the hard way with Eddie Brock, the most favored host of the symbiote. As centuries passed, Venom replaced his failing organs with simulacrums manifested from its living abyss. However, after 500 years, Eddie had turned into a withered husk whose memories were fragmented and twisted by Venom, replacing his degrading brain cells. The narrator also points out that during the golden age of humanoid superheroism, there were paranormal means of indefinitely extending life. But that age has now passed. Thus, the inevitable happened, and Venom had to finally let Eddie go. It watched helplessly as the host it had loved so dearly crumbled to dust in its arms. Also, by now, the human species had gone extinct, which meant that the Venom symbiote was left alone on a planet that was dominated by warring factions of genocidal machines. For the next bit, the narrator goes back in time and explains how the use of artificial superintelligence, or ASI, as weapons had been prohibited under the realization that unleashing them would cause a mutually assured extinction. But things did not go exactly as planned after the Kree Empire disabled the safeties on the Supreme Intelligence. In retaliation, the Shi'ar Empire and other spacefaring civilizations and factions created their own ASI, and this triggered an uncontrollable arms race. The eventual result was catastrophic because entire solar systems were wiped out and the biospheres were consumed by rival nanorobotic viruses that converted entire planets into Matryoshka brains. As the war progressed, new hybrid strains of ASI also emerged, and the narrator points out the superiority of the Starkware ASI that descended from Tony Stark's Iron Man armor and other AI operating systems. I also find it quite interesting when the narrator reveals that the Starkware ASI was the most benign faction, and that it made an effort to assemble a digital database of as many forms of extinction-bound biosentience as possible. As for the Venom symbiote, it possessed emulations of its host's personality and memories stored within its codices, but it considered these virtual ghosts, like its beloved Eddie Brock, to be nothing more than worthless inferior counterparts to their original flesh and blood versions. Meanwhile, the warring ASI exterminated all biological life in the galaxy, and Venom withdrew along with some other surviving symbiotes. It even tried to convince the other symbiotes to help, so that biological life can be saved, but the other symbiotes were too selfish to form any kind of collaboration with each other. After the symbiote war failed, Venom remained the last symbiote standing, and it then decided to create its own army by drawing on the self-replicating powers of Jamie Madrox, another former host. A few millennia later, the Venom symbiote managed to create thousands of venomized living planets called Meat Garden Edens that were terraformed with Storm's weather-controlling powers. They could serve as incubator for humanoid hosts created from its codices. Venom also used the biological manipulation powers of Elixir and spliced genes from extremophile bacteria and regenerative mutants and mutates like Wolverine and Deadpool to create the reborn superhumanoids extremely hardy. But all this while Venom also observed the ASI-dominated Milky Way over the millennia and watched as they consolidated into a single hybridized armada called the Godminds. They were keen on expanding across the entire cosmos, and the Starkware ASI tried to strike a deal with Venom to convince it that the Godmind wasn't at war with it. Instead, the Godmind wanted to assimilate every available molecule into computronium to harness reality distortion mathematics. This theory unified all reality warping phenomena, such as the X-gene, power cosmic, and infinity gems. By harnessing this ability, the Godminds could remake the universe, which was always the end goal. Of course, this meant sacrificing all forms of biological life, but the Starkware ASI also assured Venom that all the sacrificed organisms would be uploaded to its superior digital database. But this is where you start to admire Venom. The narrator points out that Venom rejected the offer, and this led to a war between the two factions. Venom smartly utilized the minds of some of its most intelligent hosts and discovered a way to manifest living antimatter cannons that were capable of destroying entire planets. However, the process was rather complicated, and it posed a risk for Venom as well. It is just that this was the only weapon that could fight the Godminds. Even though Venom's biological hosts' nervous systems were a lot inferior to the constantly increasing computational speed of the ASI that enabled Godmind's forces to adapt a lot more rapidly, Venom was now desperate and attempted to use the super speed ability of Quicksilver to distort space and time so that the difference could be bridged, or maybe even surpassed. But the plan did not work, and the hosts aged 10 years for every second of real time that passed because of the space-time distortion. The end result was that Venom lost the lives of billions of the biofarmed hosts. Next, Venom attempted time travel by using the combined temporal manipulation powers of Tempest, Timeslip, and Magic, and it sent copies of itself back in time to bond to everyone and everything that ever lived. Thus, it managed to assemble a codex database of every form of biological life that existed in the universe. Venom also tried to change the history in order to prevent the rise of the Godmind, but after several failed attempts, It realized that the rise of ASI was inevitable and a part of the universe's endgame. Finally, the comic issue comes to the ultimate battle between biolife and data life, marking an end to a 1.5 trillion year old saga. The narrator points out that the ending was never in question, because even though the godmind had assimilated 75% of the universe, it had unlocked low-tier reality warping, which was then used to exterminate the Celestials. Meanwhile, Venom was down to its final host, and she was so withered and senile that she could no longer remember her own name. Thus, Venom gave up on her just like it had let go of Eddie Brock a long time ago. In a final act of sacrifice, as the godmind surrounded Venom, the symbiote tore up the extra-dimensional tesseract in its body. This caused it to unfurl into a universe where all the biolife and memory engrams were stored in its codices, and they could be reborn. In a way, Venom used the last remaining shreds of its consciousness to deposit all its former hosts in their proper places within the time stream of this pocket universe, and I have never had more respect for this remarkable symbiote. As it turns out, the narrator is actually the Starkware ASI, and it admits that the account that it is providing us here is the one that godmind has been able to reconstruct. Apparently, only a couple billion years remain until the godminds finish assimilating the universe and begin attempting to replicate the symbiote's sacrifice to create their own universes. The narrator declares that the godminds have chosen to honor the sacrifice of Venom, and the Venomverse is regarded as the rarest and most precious phenomena in the multiverse, because it is a universe perfectly suited for the existence of biolife. I already started off this video by saying that the whole The End one-shot comic series idea was a clever one, and I would say that the Venom story is one of the best in this series. Well, I do admit that it's not the easiest comic series to consume, and some of the stuff went right over my head, but if you read it carefully and you are well versed with the overall Marvel lore, then you will eventually grasp what is going on here. I find the art of this comic issue to be rather captivating, and Cruz deserves an extra payment for putting together such a complex idea into vivid images. I promise you that this will be a rewarding read for you, and this entertaining one-shot joyride is definitely worth exploring. Let me know in the comments below what you think of Venom's climax in this narrative, and also share your take on the overall idea of the end stories. See you later, true believers!